So the church leadership of our church here has been studying this book, Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And it's been an interesting book for us to study because it's a secular book and not necessarily a spiritual book. We've really been working to make these connections. And to tell you the truth, it's not that difficult to make questions with what Brene Brown talks about here as daring leadership. It's not hard to make the connection between how she sees leadership and how we see Scripture, especially maybe through Jesus, talking about the ways in which we are to be leaders in the world. One of the keys that Brene Brown talks about in her book about what it means to lead and how to be a leader is the idea of not being afraid to be vulnerable. Now, the interesting thing about that is when we think of a leader, vulnerability is probably not one of those things that pop right to the surface as us thinking as this is a key trait that a leader needs to have. But for Brene Brown, it is key because vulnerability opens you up to being able to have a different kind of conversation with those whom you are leading. And so she says that one of the problems with vulnerability, one of the problems that we have with feeling vulnerable, it's actually vulnerability avoidance, is that when we get into a conversation, and this can be as a leader to someone you're leading, or it really could be in any kind of relationship that you're in, that when you get into a deep conversation or a difficult conversation and you begin to feel vulnerable, rather than opening up to that, rather than letting go to that and allowing your own person to come out and really begin to talk about emotions and making a connection with that person, rather than doing that and allowing that vulnerability to flow, we armor up. We try to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves from being vulnerable because we're afraid of what's going to happen. She says when we do this, when we armor up, we do this as a way of self-protecting. We do it because we think that we have to, in order to look competent, we have to always look like we are in control. And it's really hard to trust another person with those things that we don't feel like we are in control of within our own lives. And when we begin to feel that lack of control, we often become defensive. And this armoring up process is what we do to protect ourselves. But according to Brown in her research, letting go of that need and really truly being yourself is what we need to do more often, especially when things get really difficult. And as I was studying this for a devotional that we're doing with our elders and deacons, I was reminded of the story of David and Goliath. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the story of David and Goliath. Saul and the people of Israel are fighting the Philistines, and during this particular battle, the Philistines bring up their best and strongest warrior. His name is Goliath, and he is bigger and stronger than anyone. He is this giant of a man. And as he comes out on the battlefield and taunts the Israelites, saying, "Send out your favorite, your most mighty warrior, and we will do battle, and whoever wins between the two of us, that will be the one that's declared a winner." As he continues to taunt the Israelites, King Saul and all the other warriors are afraid, and they sit back and they're timid. They don't want to go and fight Goliath. Well, about that time, David, who is the youngest of all of his brothers, who is at this point working as his father's shepherd out in the fields, David has come to the battlefield to bring his older brothers a supply of food. And as he gets there, he sees what's happening and he's embarrassed. And he says to King Saul, "Let me go and fight Goliath. Let me go and take on this biggest challenge." And after a while, eventually Saul relents and he allows David to go and fight Goliath. But this is what he does first. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 38, this is what it tells us. Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped on Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot walk in these, for I am not used to them. So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag in a pouch. He slung this, his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. Now, if you can picture what's going on here, Saul knows that this battle that's going to be waged is going to be a huge battle. And so Saul is used to the way a warrior would often go to battle, and that's to armor up. Get on your biggest and baddest and heaviest suit of armor that you can with your biggest and your strongest sword, because that's how you battle giants. That's how you battle in major places of conflict. But David says no. And I love this image that's provided here of David saying, look, I can't walk around in these. I can't be me in all of this armor. I can't be me armored up, because this is not who I am. God made me as God made me, and I'm going to go do battle in a vulnerable state of not having any armor, without having any sword, but I'm going to use those things that God has given me. And I am not going to be afraid of my vulnerability, because I know that God is with me. Now, of course, I'm putting a lot of words into David's mouth, right? But isn't that what's going on in the story? David is refusing armor because he recognizes that that's not going to get him where he needs to be. He can't armor up because ultimately it makes him weaker. What an interesting idea. And I wonder if any of that holds true in any other places of our lives. When we're in places of leadership, yes, perhaps. But what about other times we're in difficult conversations? Difficult conversations maybe with our spouse. Difficult conversations with our children, with a boss, with someone who we have been in conflict with for a long time. Is the answer to that armoring up, or is the answer to that being who we are? Now, yes, there are times when failure will still happen, but it's not because of the armor. It's because we're not being who we are. So, vulnerability. It's an important key to who we are. But when we are most vulnerable, and when we lean and rely on the God who made us, success is much more readily available to us than if we trust our own sense of closing ourselves off.